Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring, and the third video in my series on Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress Escalation. In previous videos, I have done an overview and unboxing, and I've taken an in-depth look at the new mission and also which elements from the expansion you can incorporate into your base game. Today, we are going to look at the nefarious villains. We're going to look at the assembled miniatures. I will talk about how easy they were to assemble, and then we will look at their character sheets and their new abilities and things like that. So this is actually the Cultist champion. Doesn't she look pleasant? Yeah, she's a particularly nasty looking piece of work. The expansion comes with a unit of 7 cultists. You get 4 regulars, 2 special weapons, and this cultist champion. It would have been nice to have had a unit of 10. I would have liked to have had 3 more miniatures, especially considering the price of the expansion, but they are very good miniatures. They are all unique. They are monopose push fit miniatures. They go together without glue. However, I have glued all of mine, and I will talk a little bit about that construction in a moment. But first of all, I did want to mention that although these are cultists, they're classed as cultists, they don't give off much of a cult vibe, really, to me. They look much more like post-apocalyptic gangs. They look like they could have stepped right out of Mad Max or any 1970s Italian exploitation film. And for that reason, this has been mentioned by other people as well, they kind of look like they would fit in very nicely with Necromunda. They do look a bit like a Necromunda gang, and this is reinforced by the fact that they come with a heavy stubber and a grenade launcher, which are the kind of weapons that I associate with Necromunda more so than anything else. But yeah, they're really cool miniatures, but I get more of a ganger vibe than a cultist vibe, let's say. What I have noticed with a lot of these miniatures, I haven't had a lot of fun putting these together, if I'm honest. They were a bit of a pain because they're push fit, so you get pegs and then you get little holes that the pegs get pushed into, and that's supposed to hold them together. But I have found with a lot of push fit miniatures in the past that the pegs can be very tight, and pushing the bits together, they don't fit together flush. There's a little gap, and because some of these models are very delicate, look at the beautiful delicate detailing on there, and obviously the flowing hair and things like that, and it makes it very difficult to get enough pressure to push 2 bits together really tightly. You end up stabbing your finger or potentially bending or breaking a piece of plastic, so I don't like to do it. So what I've done with most of these miniatures is I have cut a millimetre or so off of the end of any peg, and slightly widened any hole, and then dropped a bit of glue in the hole and then pushed the miniature together, and then you get a nice close fit. And I have to say, they have done a pretty good job of hiding where seams are. I mean, there is a seam down here across the chest, but because that seam is next to a strap here that comes down from the shoulder pauldron, when that's painted up, you won't really see that seam. It's very clever, very nicely done. But yeah, they've not been the most enjoyable miniatures to put together. They're very fiddly, and they obviously only get together one way. So if you want to do conversions and things like that, it's a little bit more difficult. But I don't mind. I don't tend to do too many conversions. I do them every now and again, but I wouldn't have done conversions on these because they're brand new miniatures that I don't already have in my collection. So I would have wanted them looking like this. So yeah, you get the cult leader. Then you get the heavy stubber. And again, this is another female character. So the female characters seem to be given primary roles in the cult, which is quite nice. It's a good sort of solid pose, as you would expect if you're holding a gun like that. This character will forever be known as Vasquez in my games. She's got a nice unicorn horn. She is definitely got a My Little Pony vibe going on there. The next special weapon guy is the grenade launcher, and this is my least favourite miniature in the set, just because it's a little bit boring. It's kind of just sort of advancing and firing the grenade launcher, but I kind of feel like I would have liked more of a bracing stance. I would have liked to have seen him being a little bit lower, bracing into the shock of the grenade coming out. Just a slightly more dynamic pose, I think. Also, not so keen on the baby unicorn horn on that one. I think a single horn on your helmet, go big or go home. A big horn can kind of look cool, as Vasquez proves here, but a teeny horn, not so much maybe. This guy's reloading. It's a really cool pose. I like this a lot. You don't get enough miniatures that are not sort of poised, aiming or running, so it's nice to have something that's a little bit different. And this guy, he's about to slam a new cartridge into his autogun, which is very cool. Most of these miniatures had very similar assembly. They would, like, the body went together in a couple of sections, and then maybe the arm would go on afterwards. And again, they tried to hide as many seams as possible with buckles and belts and straps. So, I mean, you might be able to see there above the strap. There's a join there. But it's very cool. I like his mask. Doesn't look like someone you'd want to bump into in a dark alleyway. This is a cool miniature, but it's a more traditional aiming and shooting pose. Not a lot to say about him. The seam not well hidden on this one. This is one of those. I think this is one of the first ones I put together, and yeah, it's one that really felt like it needed glue, because when you put the two parts together, the bottom of the cape just wanted to pull apart and make a gap there, and even glued, it still wants to kind of pull apart a little bit. Our grenade thrower, another female character, a really cool stance. It's a grenade throwing stances can sometimes look a little bit janky, but this is a really good one. Really cool. She has an autogun also. And then finally, one of my favourites, in fact possibly my favourite miniature, just because it's doing something so different to what you normally get. Like I said with the one reloading, it's nice to see miniatures where the characters are doing something other than shooting or aiming or ducking down behind something. And this one's running with an ammo crate. With the gun across the shoulder. It's a very cool pose. The only thing I didn't like about it, and this is something that bugs me with miniatures in general, is that he's leaning quite far forward. I don't know why, but this is a thing with me, that when miniatures lean too far forwards, I find it a bit jarring. Even when they're running and things like that, I like them to be a little bit more upright. So what I have done, just to help with that slightly, is I glued him in the base, slightly pushed back with the point up slightly, just to straighten him a little bit so he's not leaning quite so far forwards, and obviously that will get hidden once I've painted and done the base. But yeah, I really like him. I like his hat. I like the horns. It's cool. It's got quite a visible seam there that will need some liquid green stuff, but it's just a cool pose. It's a cool, interesting, different pose. Now, the Cultists are probably most similar to Traitor Guardsmen from the base game. They have the same movement, the same number of wounds, and the same size. And yeah, they're very similar, except they have better weapons and they have some special rules that make them a little bit deadlier in numbers, which is another reason why I would have liked to have had 10 rather than the 7 you get. So let's have a quick look at what we've got. We've got auto guns, which are actually the same as las guns in this game. They're one triangle dice, one 8-sided dice across the board. Would have been nice to have a slight variation from the las guns, but you know, when you distill various different weaponry into a simple dice mechanism like Blackstone Fortress has, sometimes you have to make concessions in that regard. I understand that. The grenade launcher guy has a cool ability where if he targets a hex that has a single character in it, then you will roll the first dice on the chart. But if he targets a hex that has multiple characters in it, then he attacks every character in that hex using the second value. So he chooses between crack and flat grenades, between crack and frag grenades. Sorry, which is cool. Grenades are the same as you get with your traitor guardsmen. So they ignore terrain and they attack each explorer in the hex. The heavy stubber is brutal at mid-range. You do not want this thing hitting you at mid-range because it's rolling 2 of the big dice, so it's gonna bring some pain. Unfortunately, there's not really anything to protect the special weapons, so they're always going to be your first target. And with only 2 wounds, I do wonder how often the heavy stubber is going to be able to get off a mid-range attack against you. I think you'd probably have to be caught napping, or just be completely flooded with enemies to get into a situation where that heavy stubber can get off that really powerful attack. I think as soon as it starts bringing the heavy stubber to bear, this is going to be your number 1 target, and get it sorted. And then finally we have the stub carbine and chainsword. This is the loadout carried by the champion, who also gets to add 1 wound to their stat line, the same as the traitor guardsman sergeant. And this is something that I think emphasizes something that the designers got wrong with Blackstone Fortress, and that's critical wounds. When you apply a critical wound to an enemy, it's the equivalent of 3 wounds. And that means the difference between having 2 wounds and 3 wounds isn't that great, because especially later on in the game, you get quite a lot of options where you can generate critical wounds. And so having the extra wound on the 2 wounds you would normally get doesn't make a difference, because 1 critical hit and you're still dead. I do think critical hits should only inflict 2 wounds, and that way, if you've got something that has 3 wounds, even a critical hit isn't going to take it immediately out of action. It makes it that you have to really drop a lot of firepower on the slightly tougher enemies. What else? They have a similar rule to the guardsmen, in that once they have a group of a certain size, you have to include the champion and things like that. You can only have 1 stubber and 1 grenade launcher at a time, which is only going to be applicable if you buy another set of the miniatures, because you only get 1 of each anyway. Looking at their actions on the back, they have a special action called Overwhelm, which is quite scary. I think this is going to be the only way that they're really going to get into those positions to bring a lot of pain. They move towards the closest explorer that has another cultist hostile adjacent to it, and then they attack an explorer that is adjacent and visible to them. And if there's no explorers adjacent and visible, they move again, so they can really cover some ground. And if there's other enemies adjacent to you, they're going to keep layering up hits. They're going to keep attacking. They also have this full auto ability, which is make an attack roll against each explorer adjacent and visible to this hostile. If only 1 explorer is adjacent, then you go to an onslaught instead. So they're really designed to cover ground quickly, get up in your face, and then hit everybody multiple times. They just go into a whirling, psychotic dervish of angry, stabbing shootiness. Additionally, leading them, you get a Firebrand. A Firebrand is like a cult leader. He will never turn up on his own. He will always turn up with some other cultists, unless you have ran out of cultists by the time that you would spawn him. I don't think it's possible to actually do that. I think he's always going to be the first spawn, so he will always spawn with an entourage. It's a very cool miniature. It was very fiddly, and it is a miniature that, for me, should not be assembled without glue. For example, this pipe here that goes all the way around, there's actually a join in the middle there that if you don't glue it, it's just the two bits just sit next to each other, and they're not going to sit and stay together nicely. There's always going to be a visible gap between them if you don't glue it. And there's a few fiddly points, like there's where this handle goes in here. If you don't glue it, that might sort of pop out. And the two halves of the skull thing around his head don't really meet and stay together, and it just felt very, without glue, it felt very springy, like the bits didn't want to stay tightly together. They wanted to pull apart slightly. So a little bit of plastic glue to melt the bits together, and I think it's a much better finish. It's a very cool miniature though. I love the fire coming out. That's some excellent sculpting there. That's incredibly dynamic, and I love the fact it looks like a forked tongue. I'm assuming that is a purposeful sculpting thing, that it does look like a wicked evil tongue of fire, which is very cool. Very nice little detail, especially when you consider that the end of the Firebrand is actually an open mouth. It's a skull. So it does look like a big fiery tongue coming out, and that's just cool. And I particularly like this head thing he's wearing here. I think they've painted this metallic in the actual painting, in the officially painted miniatures, but you've got these tusks at the front and a jawbone and a thing. So I want to know where he got this from. Is this something from the Blackstone Fortress that he has killed and made into this? Are we going to get some big sort of half metallic or metallic-like insectoid creature with huge, great big tusks and the jaws here like this? Or is it a combination of tusks from things he's killed and something he's made? I don't know. If it's actually part of a Blackstone Fortress native alien entity, I want a miniature for it. I really do. Skulls. Many skulls. Also noticed he's carrying extra grenades around him. I'm sure he doesn't care, but if I was already carrying something which is going to have a explosive chemical in it for the fire, and I'm shooting fire everywhere, carrying grenades wouldn't be on top of my list of things I would want to do. But that's just me. He's a big miniature. He's on a big base. Worth noting, I think, that in the box you should get a bag containing 25mm bases, which will do all of your cultists, and then you should get a bag with 6 32mm bases in it. That will do your Firebrand, your X101 retinue character, and your 4 heroes. My bag of 32mm bases only had 3 32mm bases in it, and then it had 3 25mm bases that didn't even have slotters, so they were completely the wrong product, completely incompatible with these push-fit miniatures. Obviously, Games Workshop being Games Workshop, I contacted them the evening that I opened the product, and they contacted me the next morning and said, we're really sorry, your bases are in the post, because they are brilliant like that. So it's not a problem, but yeah, something to watch out for. Make sure you've got the right bases. Let's have a look at the character card for this guy. He's kind of like a mini boss, but he turns up quite frequently. He's pretty robust with 5 wounds, but again, I think the fact that a critical wound causes 3 wounds means that he's not as solid as he could be. He's only got the one weapon. It's a Hellfire Torch, and it's kind of like a flamethrower, so it has the move up command at range 4+, which is the same as the flamer that the traitor guardsmen have. So if he's at that range, he will advance up to have a better chance of burning you later. If you do get him at range 2 to 3, he's going to bring the hurt, because the torrent of flame is rolling 2 of the big dice, and it ignores cover, and it makes an attack against each explorer in the same hex as the target. So if you've got a couple of characters in a hex at range 2 to 3 and this guy pops up, it's going to be bad news for you. He also Add 2 to the behavior rolls of cultists that are within 2 hexes and visible of him, which means you are more likely to get those overwhelm results for the other cultists. They're more likely to get all buoyed up and run at you and do onslaughts and multiple attacks and auto attack you for everybody and just basically cause all kind of bloody mayhem. And furthermore, if you kill him, you have to roll the dice, and if you get a critical success, he blows up, and then you get to make an attack against each hostile explorer in the same hex as him and in each adjacent hex. I do wonder whether it was necessary to have the extra roll to see if he exploded. I think it should just be a case that he explodes and does the attack. That should be what happens. If you run up and stick a sword into a guy carrying this much explosive material, yeah, should expect to get charred eyebrows. That's the way I see it anyway. He has some unique actions. He has All Shall Burn, where you make an attack roll against each explorer and hostile within 2 hexes of and visible to the Firebrand. So he just goes woof, and bad news bears for everybody. He also has the ability Firestorm. Place a Firestorm marker beside the Cultist Firebrand. While a Firestorm marker is beside this Cultist Firebrand, each time an explorer moves into a hex that is within 2 hexes of them, the Cultist Firebrand makes a Hellfire Torch attack against that explorer. After that attack is resolved, that explorer can continue to move. Remove the Firestorm marker the next time the Cultist Firebrand is activated. So he kind of gets like an Overwatch ability, which is cool. It's something that's gonna stop you getting up in his grill quite so much, pun intended, I guess. But again, I do worry about only having the 5 wounds. 5 wounds does make him, I think, the most powerful sort of thing that can just turn up on a regular basis besides the Ogrin or the dreaded Amble. The Space Marines have only got 4 wounds. Everything else has got either 3 or 2 until you get up to like Obsidium Alex and then the dreaded Amble and the Ogrin. I think even the Traitor Commissar's only got a couple of wounds, but he uses the Ogrin as a soak to protect him. But he doesn't have anything to protect him. I think there should have been something that would make cultists throw themselves in front of him to protect him more, because I think a lot of the cool things he can do, the whooshy, fiery nonsense, using the Firestorm and things like that, you kind of want him on the board quite a while to make the most of those interesting effects. And again, I think he's going to have a big bullseye painted on his forehead, and people are going to try and take him down at massive range. And if you've got like one of those crazy weapons that can shoot through cover and things like that, you can probably take him down in a couple of shots. So maybe he needed some way that cultists could sacrifice themselves to keep the Firebrand, keep the fires burning. But anyway, there we go. So those are your 2 types of main character that are introduced in this expansion. There is one other type of enemy that is introduced, and I'm going to show the character card for it now. It's a minor story spoiler. I've avoided spoiling it in all of my previous videos, and I'm going to put a spoiler warning here now. So if you want to avoid this spoiler, look down in the video description, and there'll be a timestamp to get ahead past this point. But here we go. Spoiler starts now. We get an upgraded Obsidium Alex. This is because Obsidium Alex wasn't killed at all. Or he was killed, but he was brought back by the Blackstone Fortress and is now sort of fused with the technology somewhat and has been made greater than he was before. So you still use your Obsidium Alex miniature from the base game. It would have been nice to have had, I think, a new miniature for him with maybe some like part robotic bits coming off of him and things like that. It would have been cool. He has improved slightly. If we look at his original character card, he's gone from 12 wounds to 18 wounds, which is quite a bump. He still has the same sort of attacks, but his Thunder Hammer has become a demon-bound hammer with a soul-crushing blow. And what happens here is if he rolls 2 critical successes, you take an additional grievous wound. So you can actually take 2 grievous wounds at a time. And he still has the Lord of War ability, which means he takes 2 actions one after another. So if he gets up to you, hits you with the demon hammer and causes 2 grievous wounds, then takes his second action and hits you again, he can basically put you out of action in 1 turn. He wouldn't be able to kill you because you need to take a 5th wound to actually die, but he can take someone who is fully healthy and active to basically crippled and relying on destiny dice to activate in 1 round of combat. So he's someone that you want to keep at a distance. His move has increased to 3, so that's going to be a little bit more difficult. Other than that, he's pretty much the same. He's basically the same character he always was. I think they've missed a trick a little bit by not giving us some new Chaos Space Marines to protect him. It would have been nice to have given, if he's been brought back by the Blackstone Fortress and enhanced, wouldn't he have also enhanced his bodyguard, his retinue? I think they could have included a couple of miniatures of enhanced Space Marines, or at the very least just included a couple more Space Marines, because you only get 2 Space Marine miniatures in the base game, which means you can only ever have up to 2 Chaos Space Marines protecting Obsidium Alex. I feel like by now we should have a few more Chaos Space Marines to chuck on the board, or if we haven't got a few more, then some souped up versions. It would have been cool to have had some enhanced, augmented enemies that would fight alongside him, but we didn't get that, and it's a bit of a missed opportunity, which is a shame. So there we go. That is it. That's all of our new enemies that are going to be causing us trouble as we attempt to find the Chaos Shrines and resolve the escalation mission. Good stuff. I like the miniatures. Like I say, it would have been nice to have had a few extra cultists to make it up to 10, and I do think that they possibly could have done something to make the Firebrand a little bit more resilient. I do think he's not going to get to do as many cool things as he might have been able to do. But that is it for now. I hope you found this interesting. I've tried to cover everything, but if you still have comments or queries, do please leave them below and I will do my best to answer. The next video I do, I'm going to take a look at our new heroes, and we will also take a look at their spaceship abilities and the resource decks that come with those spaceships. Hopefully you will join me for that video. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.